Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm Laura Shaughnessy. I serve as chair of the Counselor Advisory Committee for the Kansas BSRB. I asked the members of the advisory committee to respond to a roll call to signify their presence at this open meeting that's being conducted remotely by conference call and other electronic medium. Jim Kilmartin.
Present.
Good morning. Harriet Buckner. Oh, you're muted, but I saw you say hello.
I'm here.
Thank you. Good morning. Bob Kircher.
I'm here.
Good morning.
Morning.
Andrew Shekor.
Here.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Neil Torres Rivera. Oh, there you are. Can you unmute and say present so we have it? Oh,
Adil, it appears that your audio is not working even after you unmuted.
so state for the record that Adil Torres Rivera is here. He's having audio problems. I note the following staff members are also present. I see David Fye. Good morning.
Morning.
And Leslie Allen. Good morning.
Good morning.
Next, David Fye will read a message concerning this meeting being held remotely.
This is David Fye, Executive Director for the Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Public comment allows the public to address the advisory committee about its concerns, but the Kansas Open Meeting Act, or KOMA, does not require the advisory committee to provide public comment or answer questions from individuals. Individuals requesting to provide public comment could contact the executive director prior to the meeting by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov. There will be no public comment at this meeting as no individuals requested to provide public comment. Because we are conducting this meeting remotely by conference call and other teleconference ability, I state for the record the following information. Public access to this meeting is being conducted by a medium of interactive communication that allows members of the public without cost to attend the meeting through the use of the conference call and on the board's YouTube channel. While the meeting is conducted remotely, the requirements of the KOMA are not suspended, so we'll be conducting this meeting pursuant to KOMA. On August 23rd, 2022, we sent notice of the advisory committee meeting to all individuals who had requested notice of the advisory committee meetings. This notice was also posted on the board's website, ksbsrb.ks.gov. You may obtain a copy of the notice at that website. An agenda and other meeting material have been posted on the board's website and may be reviewed. You may also request a copy of the agenda be sent to you directly by email by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov with the subject line request for the agenda, and it will be sent to you. The notice contains information for the conference call and YouTube channel that allows members of the public to attend this meeting free of charge. The notice also states that if there are any technical issues during the meeting, you may call the board office at 785-296-3240 or send an email to bsrb@ks.gov. A recording of the meeting will be available on the BSRB YouTube channel following the conclusion of the meeting by using the link to the meeting on the agenda. And Laura, there was one individual who was on the conference call. He indicated that his name is Jamal Robinson, and so we do have one guest in attendance on the conference call as well. And Laura, you are muted currently.
Thank you for letting us know. Thank you for letting me know that. The meeting is now called to order and the advisory committee will begin its discussion of the first item on its agenda, which is agenda approval. And does anybody have any questions or anything they need to add to the agenda before we make a motion to approve the agenda? Okay. I need a motion to approve the agenda so we can move forward.
So moved.
I need a second.
I second.
Thank you. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Hi.
Aye. Opposed would be nay. Okay. Okay, no opposed, so we'll move forward. So any questions? We need to review and approve the minutes from the previous meeting on August 1st. Does anybody have any changes?
And I thought I would make a comment here too. I did go ahead and send out a follow-up email this morning that had minutes from the last meeting. There's also some minutes for your review from the two subcommittee meetings of the unprofessional conduct regulations review. But if you would like, go ahead and review those minutes in between now and the next meeting. But if you could quickly do a review of the minutes from the last meeting and take a vote on that, that would be helpful.
Okay, so we won't do unprofessional conduct right now. We'll just do the last meeting minutes.
Correct.
Okay. So as we take time, let me know if there are any changes we need to make. Don't see anything. Excuse me. Sure, you're all speed reading.
I move we accept the minutes from the August 1st Advisory Council meeting.
Thank you, Bob. I need a second if someone has finished those notes other than Bob.
I'll second.
Okay, Jim seconds. And anybody, all in favor, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed would be nay. Okay, sounds like we are approving the minutes from the August 1st Advisory Committee meeting. Okay, Executive Director's Report. David, take it.
Thank you, Laura.
Hmm.
So the first item I want to do, just keep the advisory committee updated on, is we are still under some of the governor's direction related to the pandemic to avoid in-person meetings unless we can space everyone appropriately. And so we are continuing to hold most of the board and advisory committee meetings remotely, but I'll keep you updated if there's a change in that from the governor's office. At the last board meeting, there were a couple of items, and I wanted to make the advisory committee aware of those items. This was a board meeting that took place on September 12th, 2022. There was an individual from a company called CE Broker who spoke to the board and provided some information on a company and some of the software that company utilizes. It would be an alternative if the board wanted to pursue it for how the board tracks continuing education and handles some of its auditing process. So that presentation by the individual from CE Broker was at that last board meeting. If you want more information about that, feel free to go ahead and review that presentation from the YouTube stream of the board meeting. Additionally, there was a representative from the Heart of America Professional Network who spoke about a potential impaired provider program. The board had talked about that earlier this year. And Leslie C. Wester, who is with the Heart of America Professional Network, provided more information to the board and some additional materials. And the board may continue to have conversations about an impaired provider program for the BSRB and the professions underneath the BSRB. Additionally, the board took some further action on modifying the investigation policy. The primary mission of the BSRB is to oversee the professions that it regulates through licensing, but we also receive complaints against practitioners and do investigations. And the group that investigates those complaints here in the office, and also the board members that review them that sit on the complaint review committee, use an investigation policy. And that document is in the process of being updated. There were several changes that were made to that policy. There are still a few more that need to be discussed and considered by the board. And so it is likely the board will finalize further adjustments to that policy, either at the offsite planning meeting coming up in October or at the next scheduled board meeting, the second Monday in November. Additionally, I mentioned that the board is going to be having an out-of-town planning meeting. Once a year, the board attempts to have an offsite meeting for the purposes of going through items for the legislative agenda of the board. That out-of-town planning meeting is scheduled this year for Monday, October 24th. The most likely starting time for that meeting currently is around 9 a.m., but we're still working on finalizing the agenda for that meeting. And it should last all day, so it should go from about 9 a.m. until about 5 p.m. And that will be in Olathe, and the exact location for the meeting is currently on the board's website. But since that will be a meeting away from the office, we will likely not be live streaming that meeting, but we will be opening that meeting up to the public if individuals wish to attend. And if they do wish to attend, there's some information on the website about letting us know in advance to make sure that we have proper spacing for everyone who would be attending that meeting. In terms of some legislative updates, I attended a meeting of the CanCare Oversight Committee. They also oversee additional health topics as well. And that committee meeting was on Tuesday, September 27th. The reason that I attended that meeting and spoke to the committee is in the past 2 years, there has been a special legislative committee on mental health modernization and reform. And some of the recommendations from the committee that met in the fall of 2021 and also the committee that met in the fall of 2020 were being revisited if they were still pending. And so we were not the primary agency on any of the recommendations, but there were a couple that talked about workforce issues, talked about consistent standards for telehealth. And so I spoke to the committee and informed them about some of the recent discussions of the board and the advisory committees and answered a few questions from the members of that committee. We are also scheduled, Leslie Allen and myself, to go in front of a committee. It is the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules and Regulations, which will be on October 18th. We are in the process of having some of the regulations for the professions under the BSRB updated. Some of those relate to changes that happened as it related to legislation that was passed during the 2021 session and also the 2022 session, and then some other recommended changes to regulations that have been put forward by the board. Those proposed changes to regulations are posted on the BSRB website, and a notice was published in the Secretary of State's publication, the Kansas Register. But the proposed changes to the regulations are all up for review. So if anyone wants to take a look at some of those potential changes, they can go ahead and do that. Additionally, we have put out notice that we will have an open meeting on November 8th at the board office from 10 a.m. until 11 a.m. And that is for the purpose of receiving any kind of oral comments from individuals who wish to come and speak to any of those potential changes. And then, or if they want to submit written changes, they can do that according to the notice we put out, and they can send those directly to myself. And then we will go ahead and take those comments and provide them to the board prior to the changes and regulations being officially put into place. And with that, I think I will go ahead and close my report, and I can answer any questions from members of the advisory committee.
Thank you, David. Any questions for David? No? Okay. Well, let's move on. I want to say a few things about the NBCC conference that we attended. I got to meet David Fye for the first time. And it was very exciting to be in person. I've not met anybody in person since I started after COVID. So we attended the Counseling Regulatory Board Annual Summit put on by the NBCC. And it was really interesting. So many great topics. One of those great topics was presented by David Fye. He was a speaker on Friday afternoon. His talk was Innovations in Licensing. And he made that talk interesting. There was good data, and it was actually really funny. You had some great jokes thrown in there. My favorite one was the warning about something traumatic we were going to look at. And you want to tell them what it was?
I said that licensing was math, and math for a lot of people can be very traumatic.
So he warned everyone, and there was this little bit of bracing, and then everybody laughed when they saw the image, because I'm sure they all agreed and it was funny. But no, David did a terrific job. He did a great job representing our state. So I just want to thank you for your contribution to the conference, David. And I know you're going to talk about some of the things we covered, but you did a great job.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, it was a really good conference. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak about some of the work that the board is doing and some of the conversations that we've had recently. When I talked a little bit about licensing being math, I talked about licensing as an equation. And I said, when you talk about a lot of the ways that people are looking at adding to the workforce currently, they're talking about individuals coming in fresh to the licensure process. And there's a lot of different ways that you can look at that. But I also said, as part of that equation, you got to think about the individuals that are currently licensed and trying to think of ways to help those individuals retain their license or not drop off. And then you also should be thinking about people who have let their licenses expire in recent years. And if the board can think creatively about incentivizing or helping individuals reinstate their license, as long as their license wasn't revoked for disciplinary reasons or something like that. But if they stepped away and they wish to practice again, if you think about the different pieces of that equation, there may be ways that we can look at helping out with workforce issues without considering removing some of the important public protection requirements for licensure that we currently have in place. But they also had good speakers at that conference that talked about the impaired provider programs in some of the other states. They provided some information on the counseling compact that is being considered by different states. And we had a presentation on that just recently too. And they also had some breakout rooms that talked about some different topics. And one of the ones that I sat in on was talking about provisional licenses. And what was really interesting is, I think one of the tricky things between looking at our state versus other state is not all states define the same terms the same way. And so that was eye-opening for me and some of the things that individuals were talking about as that part of that conversation. Because, we may have ideas, but if we're using terms and we may have different definitions for those terms, there's a step we need to take first to make sure we're all on the same page. So a lot of good conversations, a lot of good connections. Was able to follow up with a few people for some additional information from their states based on what I talked about. And so growing that network and having some resources in other states is going to be really helpful, not just right now, but also in the future, looking forward. So Laura, I really appreciated you attending that conference. And I thought it was really helpful to have you there and for us to both learn about a lot of the topics the speakers were talking about as well.
Definitely. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it was really, really informative. So many great things on the horizon. A lot of discussion about the compact, and 16 states have adopted it now. So things are really heating up, and we'll come back to that in new business. Is that a new? Yeah, that's a new business. Yeah. Anyway, it was very interesting, very informative. So thank you for that report. Okay, let's move on to old business. The first item, discussion for the recommendation of removing in-person from our language on 102.3-3A. I don't remember how far that discussion led. Had we agreed about the removal of the language, or were we still discussing it? I can't remember how far we went.
So I think there were 3 topics that received a lot of discussion in reviewing those educational requirements. One had to do with the chair or the person directing the program and what type of degree they had. And then the other dealt with core faculty and those ratios involving core faculty members. And there were not any recommendations regarding those 2 issues. The third item really came down to in the regulation, there's currently a requirement that some of the education, if you did not go to a KCREP or a pro-accredited program or a program that's accredited by the national accrediting body, then we have to evaluate your standards based on what is in regulation. And there's a requirement there that some of the coursework has to be received in residence. As part of that in residence definition, there is a requirement that you would be physically present at the school in front of core faculty members. And so the advisory committee was supportive of removing the requirement of being in the physical presence at the school. But there wasn't a specific recommendation that was made. The advisory committee had requested some language to be brought back just to kind of see how that would be phrased. And then also to ensure that there was some language that would make it clear that face-to-face, as it's described in the regulation, could be either in the same physical presence or it could be by screen, which would allow some of the individuals coming from online programs to be able to meet the requirements for licensure more easily. Because if you have a requirement that there has to be a physical presence component, that's going to be really difficult for a lot of those online programs to meet, if not impossible. So what we did is we went ahead and marked up some of the language with those potential changes. And I'll share my screen here. So what I'm showing here is a copy of KAR 102-3-3A. These are the education requirements. And when I talked about the in-residence definition, that was included in 102-3-3A A2. And the current definition says when used to describe a student, it means that the student is present at the physical location of the institution for the purpose of completing coursework during which the student and one or more core faculty members are in face-to-face contact. And so one of the cleanest ways to just, if you wanted to make a recommendation to remove the physical presence component, you could just strike through language beginning with present at the physical location of the institution for the purpose of, so that the new regulation would read, in residence, when used to describe a student, means the student is completing coursework during which the student and one or more core faculty members are in face-to-face contact. And then the second part of that change would be similar to what we clarified when we were looking at being able to allow supervision hours by televideo. And that is to essentially, instead of having a period at the end of that sentence, you could just use a ... or you just have this as a continuation of that sentence. And you would say, so one or more core faculty members are in face-to-face contact, either in person or by synchronous video conferencing. And so you would just add that additional phrase at the end of the sentence to clarify that in residence could be achieved by the student either being there physically in front of the core faculty members or could do it by screen in front of the core faculty members. And in between your last meeting and now, several of the advisory committees have gone ahead and made a recommendation to remove this as part of the regulation. It was voted on to be recommended back to the board, making this change by the Addiction Counseling Advisory Committee, the Social Work Advisory Committee, and also, the Addiction Counseling, the Social Work, and there was one other that also recommended making this change. And so this would be consistent with the changes they have already voted on as well. So I guess the question really is in terms of your profession and your advisory committee, are you in favor of making this recommendation to remove that requirement of being in the same physical location?
I do have a question. Is there a specified that all coursework is that way, or most of it, or
50%.
is there a specification?
The regulation requires 50% be done in
50%?
residence. Or 30 semester credit hours.
And the profession that I was forgetting was the marriage and family therapy profession. So the addiction counseling, social work, and marriage and family therapy have already voted to make this change to remove the physical presence component as part of the in-residence definition.
The thing I wonder about is with the added language where it says face-to-face, either in person or synchronous video conferencing. A lot of online ed is asynchronous, where they're not actually sitting with the professors. So they have the feedback that they're getting back and forth, but it is done independently. For example, my doctorate, there was some synchronous components, but the students that I worked with were asynchronous with some residencies they had to attend. And some of the courses, because of the nature of the course, were synchronous, but the majority of them were asynchronous, which would eliminate, well, I don't know, they're K-Prep accredited, but if we're saying, I mean, they would be okay, but if it's a non-K-Prep accredited degree, and they're doing the same thing as the K-Prep accredited folks, in theory, then they still would not be able to meet the requirement based on the language as it is because of the amount of asynchronous work they'd be doing. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, if I'm understanding what you're saying, I think, yeah, it would be accurate from what my understanding is.
So I just wonder about that, because if the idea is we're going to try to make people that are doing their education online are not, I can think of schools that, was it the University of Phoenix, or maybe it's Ottawa, one of those two schools has an online program, but they're not K-Prep accredited. And so any course their students would participate in that are not face-to-face, either in person or synchronous, would not be allowed under the way this is written. I just want to make sure I'm understanding that. And if so, we might want to consider what we're going for.
Well, and I think there's a few pieces to this. Yes, if it's a K-Prep accredited program, then it wouldn't need to meet this standard. If it's a non-K-Prep accredited standard, then you would apply this, and that physical presence component tends to be, we are pretty unique as a state that currently requires that for our individuals applying for licensure. And I'm not sure that I can speak to the other items, because the main topic that I had kind of discussed with other states really dealt with whether any other states have a requirement that you have to be physically there at the school.
I think the thing that is the synchronous part, just knowing that most online programming is asynchronous, so there's not going to be a synchronous component except just in certain specific parts. That saying that it has to be synchronous video conferencing, still, if what we're trying to do is to remove a barrier to people's online degrees being considered for licensure in our state, I don't know that this goes far enough, because most folks still wouldn't, outside of K-CREP programs, they wouldn't, if we had to use this reading, if we accepted the synchronous part, a lot of folks would be missing a number of classes, would be my guess.
Andrew, are you saying that asynchronous education is pretty typical?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, Bob too. Okay. Well, that's good to know, right? So that
At least a good number of courses within a program, if not the whole program.
Right.
There's a good number of even within Kansas, some of the programs have at least 50% of it being asynchronous.
I think, well, not the lone not professional of this group, if we want to try to make this more adaptable in the future, I'd hate to put this through the legislature with a term called synchronous, when we know going in, it doesn't really help a good percentage of potential future. And I'd rather build this to the future. And if the professionals on this advisory committee can delete synchronous, I would be more than happy to help you do that.
Or do we need to add asynchronous, or is that?
I think you just leave it as video conferencing. I mean, we don't know the technical jargon that some of these places and techies are going to use in the future. And looking at me, you all realize I'm an old guy. I had a TI calculator and a slide rule. So the future of video conferencing, we'll never know where it's going to go, but the future of definitions of terms might just be outrageous.
Okay, so leaving both out allows for future interpretation.
I believe it does.
Okay.
Dave, will this won't go through the legislative process, will it?
Well, so that's complicated a little bit. This is in regulation, so it does not have to go in statute. So the statutory changes
Right.
be in bill form. There is still a committee, Joint Committee on Administrative Rules and Regulations. So the legislature still does have oversight, and they would have this brought before them and have the ability to ask questions or, request changes potentially. But it doesn't have the same oversight as the statute. Now, the legislature, of course, could pass something in statute, and if it conflicted with this, we would go with the statute because the statute has higher jurisdiction. And there's also a constitutional amendment on the ballot this year that would change the legislature's authority on the regulatory process now. So taking that as kind of a separate issue, under the current system, this would go in front of the legislature in terms of just providing information to them, but it wouldn't have to be passed in bill form if it was just changed here in the regulation.
Okay.
So
The other disciplines that have made this change, did they leave out words like synchronous and asynchronous as well?
So they went ahead and went with this definition to clarify primarily that it was either in person or by video conferencing. I think the reason we used this phrasing is because this was the same phrasing that we talked about when we wanted to clarify the definition of face-to-face as it applied to supervision. And so we were looking to see, do we have a definition that would that we could pull from to kind of say either in person or by screen when we say face-to-face. And so we went with that definition, but that doesn't mean that we have to use that language.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, thank you.
That was my only concern, the whole supervision piece. But I had the tendency to lean toward just video conference and take it that synchronous or synchronous piece out.
Mm-hmm.
because I think they make it a little bit more flexible, if you wish.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
I think the challenge still with even video conferencing is that video conferencing implies that the person is engaged in a face-to-face interaction, and that's not true either. I mean, like I said, like and Bob said, there's going to be some classes where the students will be video conferenced in, but many of those classes are going to be just they work at their own pace. They're set up in an online, like a management system, learning management system. And
Well, I will disagree, Andrew. I mean, we can have a video classes already, taped, and the students will interact via chat. Okay, so it doesn't have to be live, so video conference could be that piece in which they have to follow up a couple of questions in which they interact via chat, with a deadline.
Sure, I get that. What I'm saying is that my experience has been most of the classes don't have videos that students watch of their professors talking. You can do that, but so the video conferencing piece is fine there. But what I'm saying is that if it's only video conferencing is considered in residence, then for any class that a person takes where there's not a video function, right, whether it's a pre-recorded video with discussion forums after or whatever, then those classes would not meet the definition of in residence, meaning the classes wouldn't count. So for instance, my doctorate, I had my counseling supervision class that was synchronous, video conferenced. I had my practicum and internship supervisions that were synchronous. But all the other classes, my teaching and counselor ed, my research classes, all those different classes I took, my theories classes and so forth, those were just done at my own pace. There's no video conferencing like videos. There was plenty of discussion, and I had regular interactions with my faculty, whether it be phone or email or so forth. But knowing that that's how many of these programs are established, and a video requirement would still be limiting, I think. It's just not going to be the case that most programs are going to have their faculty recording videos, because so much of that has to be changed from year to year when things update. So I'm just concerned that video anything requirement is going to limit any program that does not have that as part of it. And if that's what we want to do, fine. I just want to make sure I throw that out there.
What would be the appropriate term to replace video conferencing? I'm sorry, Leslie, I interrupted you.
Could you say online or video conferencing? Would that suffice?
I'm not sure the right language because I don't know what we're trying, what our end goal is.
Yeah, and I think so. In terms of the in-residence requirement, it applies to half of the coursework for this profession. So you could receive half of your coursework not in residence, but if you didn't go to an accredited school, then the current requirements would be that half of your coursework would need to be received in residence. And I think the biggest issue that we were running into was online schools that are becoming more prevalent, and specifically having that requirement that you had to have some of your coursework physically at the school would just be impossible with online schools. So I think the first thing we had identified was how common is that requirement to be physically there at the school. And we had found that is fairly unique as it relates to most of the professions under the BSRB. Now, for the psychology professions, it's a little bit different because of some of the testing that they do. So there are some schools in the psychology professions where they do require there to be physically there to receive some of the testing requirements and training. But for the other professions under the BSRB, we hadn't really seen a lot of school or a lot of states that required you to be physically there. So I think the first thing we were looking at was, would it be appropriate to remove that physical presence requirement without affecting the public protection mission of the board? Now, moving past that point, looking to see what language would be appropriate for those online classes, I think that's definitely something good to be discussed. But I think the first thing we were easily able to identify was that physical presence requirement appears to be unique. And then after that, I think there could be more items for discussion.
Which really takes us back to redefining that language,
Mhm.
taking synchronous out. What do we say instead of video conferencing, electronic
Well,
meeting?
The current language says face-to-face, so you would have to amend the current language as well.
Mhm.
Right. And I'm sorry, sir. If you want to make public comment, you needed to request public comment ahead of time. But if you want, I can follow up with you after the meeting if you want to send an email to me, and then I can provide information for you. Thank you. Under the in-residence definition, Leslie Allen just made a comment about in-residence. And it does indicate on here that it would involve completing coursework during which the student and one or more core faculty members are in face-to-face contact. And so I think that is also part of the reason why it included the synchronous video conferencing.
So that would need to go as well.
If you wanted to make a change where it wouldn't have to be directly face-to-face by screen or in person, then that is something that would need to change to.
So as a group, how are we leaning? It sounds like we're leaning toward doing that.
If you're trying to open up and gain more providers, that would certainly be the way to do it.
Mhm.
The way that it's written, it's very limiting, to be real honest.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other feedback? So it sounds like we're in agreement, in general agreement, to make the language more open. Any ideas about how to change that one phrase and add video conferencing? Take out face-to-face?
Is it like maybe that a student and one or more core faculty members are in direct contact? I mean, because I think direct could mean like the faculty feedback that they're getting from them, because these programs require, I know for my ones that I've experienced, like they require the faculty be present in the course rooms, so a certain number of days per week engaging with students, whether that's actual like the advising process with that faculty member or so forth. So I wonder, rather than face-to-face, which it could be, but it could also be direct contact with the faculty member. I don't know if that's too broad.
Yeah, because I mean, there are some online programs or online coursework that's pretty much self-paced.
Mhm.
And that, I think that may be going totally too far, but having direct contact with the instructor of the course, I think, is the key. So I that would be okay with me, at least.
Direct interaction on an ongoing basis for the duration of the course.
Right. I think that one or more core faculty members are in direct contact, with the student. You could say throughout the course. I mean, there should be direct contact throughout the entirety of the course. I mean, most of these programs are based solely on the types of discussions, the assignments, the in-class conversation. Like Adil was referring to, is like that in-class discussion post, which can be really rich, and sometimes which involves also the students responding to a video of the professor talking through something. But it's that direct interaction between the student and the faculty that simulates the conversation that would be happening in class face to face. At least that's how the Department of Ed kind of takes a look at that. Adil, you can also add to that if there's something that I'm missing there too.
No, I think you're right. I mean, I think that's the whole idea, at least for where I came from, the idea of that interaction piece, particularly core faculty.
Yeah.
Okay. So which add to the richness of the education process.
Yeah, I like the idea of specifying those things as we open it up to being, either asynchronous or, that we really need to stress that it has to be ongoing. It's a given. I mean, we know that it should be an ongoing interactive relationship between core faculty and students, but I like the idea of putting some of that language in. Anyone else? So what are we saying? Do we need to craft this right now? Or David, is this something that you do or you and I do and come back to the committee with?
Yeah, maybe it'd be helpful for us to look at a few more of our definitions from other regulations. And then come back to the next advisory committee and see if we can have something that kind of goes towards some of the comments of the advisory committee.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you. So what is the next?
I have a question. So did the social workers and the addiction people include the word synchronous?
They did. So they had indicated that they wanted to make sure that the physical requirement was removed and that it was very clear that it could be achieved either by face-to-face and presence, physical presence, or by screen. And so we had borrowed from the definition of face-to-face as it related to supervision, but they didn't have a similar conversation that you had today. So maybe if they considered some of these ideas, they might, have had a different conversation. And so I'll have some conversations with some of the chairs of those committees and see if they want to revisit their recommendations or how they want to move forward on these two.
Because I'm just wondering if they had really thought through the ramifications of including just even that word in terms of programs.
To add to that before we move on, because I know we got to move on, but one thing you might say is the direct interaction, right, between the faculty and the student throughout the course via face-to-face, synchronous or asynchronous methods, right? I mean, it's like, so you kind of encompass everything there, which it leaves it open, because the class may have synchronous components, they may have asynchronous components, they may have face-to-face components, but at least then it's saying we just want direct interaction, and these ways can meet that in-residence requirement. So it's not having to take away words that we already have in there, but it's allowing for an additional way in which that could be met. And we take face-to-face out and we just say direct, right? And then say these are the different ways in which direct communication or interaction could occur, depending on the person's program. Just an idea. So
yeah, it's certainly a clear way to, like you said, to encompass all the options so that it's clear. It'll result in less calls for Leslie and David to have to field, which I'm always a fan of.
I like that idea, Andrew.
Yeah.
I do too.
Well, great. Well, thank you for that. That helps us move along with what we'll probably end up with. So thank you. So David, are there other items from this document that we need to edit today or to discuss today? I'm looking through it and I don't see any other changes that you've been focusing on in this one.
No, I think the in-residence and that physical component was the real main piece we wanted to bring back and have a discussion on today. But I think the additional comments that the advisory committee had were really helpful. So, but I don't have any other topics on this one to talk about today.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for your discussion. Okay, an exciting one, discussion on the multi-state compact. It's exciting to see 16 states have adopted. I think there's even been one more since, haven't there, David?
It is possible. Some of the legislative sessions in other states kind of have a different time period, but that is very possible.
Yeah, so, what are our next steps here?
My last count was 18, by the way.
Oh, 18. Okay, great.
Yeah, that was my last count.
Oh, terrific.
And I want to speak in favor of the idea, particularly for military families.
Yeah.
I think that, as an ex-military person, I know how much I struggle. I got licensed in 5 states because I move a lot. So I spend a lot of money, So I think that the idea of having something that you really can carry it with you, and you don't have to, kind of retake any kind of new things, is positive. We still can maintain the idea of our requirements in terms of funding. We don't need to lose the funding piece, because I think that was a concern for David when he talked to the people, and I think that that's a legit concern. But I think that the idea of having something, being partnered up, so people can move, particularly military people who move a lot, I think is positive. That's just me.
Mhm. Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, I just have to restate that I'm going to have to abstain from making any comment during this discussion, just given my position with the Counseling Association and having to, the fact that during legal training, of course, they said that we can't engage in conversations that would put us at risk of jeopardizing other roles we might have. And so given that will be a specific issue I will be addressing on that end, I will have to abstain from conversation during this meeting.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Anyone else?
I just abstain from voting, but not from commenting. Because I think that if I stand for commenting, then I think that I'm being untruthful to myself.
Yes.
Well, and Dave, I guess the question I would have is, do I just have to abstain from voting, or can I not make any comments, or is it safer for me not to just say anything, given I'm going to be actively involved in this? The deal's involved with because ACA, but more in a outline manner, but I'm going to be directly involved in the process within the state. So I didn't know if there was feedback there.
There's not a formal process. We do ask that members of the board or members of the advisory committee, if they think there might be a conflict, to go ahead and just voice that. And then it's kind of up to them what they feel comfortable with. We always say, best to err on the side of caution if you want to abstain from a vote. But as far as remaining silent or not voicing comments, that's just kind of up to each individual as they see fit, really.
I think I've made my position clear before we got to this point, so I will go ahead and let that speak for itself at the moment. Thank you. I appreciate it.
David, are there any things you want to add from the conference that we attended? The compact was definitely a large part of the discussion. Anything relevant to us that you would share?
So if Kansas would become a part of the compact, I think there would be an implementation timeframe. Part of that would be how information would be shared. The commission itself required a certain number of states to pass the compact before it could start to meet and organize. So the first year, 2 states passed it, which did not meet the threshold. And then after that, additional states did, and they have met the threshold to start to meet and to work out the logistics. One thing that we would be doing a little bit differently. So some states only really use a clinical level as far as like a permanent license that you can continue to renew. So for us, not all of our professional counsel or licensees will be able to practice under this compact. If we became a state, it would be the clinical level of professional counseling that would fall under this. Additionally, the compact, I believe, requires fingerprinting, which is not something the BSRB currently does. So there would be a requirement that anybody practicing under the compact or being issued a privilege to practice under the compact would need to undergo the fingerprinting. So there might be an additional cost for that. And there's likely to be, because of the cost of running those fingerprints and doing that part of it. The working out the logistics with the fees, I think, has yet to be determined a little bit. And that's partly because when the commission meets, what they're scheduled to do later this year, they are going to be figuring out some different things, such as is there going to be a charge to the state of Kansas or any other state to be a member of the compact? There's some language, I believe, in the compact that allows some flexibility in terms of, would there be a fee to the states for that, or would they be able to charge fees for their operations in different ways? And so some of this is a little unclear at the moment. But those are just kind of my comments in terms of the logistics. If they passed it, we wouldn't be able to start it immediately. There would need to be some time to work out the software issues the fingerprinting issues, and then making sure that we know how the revenues would be affected by the change, by being part of the compact.
Great. Did you hear a lot of discussion about changes in revenue, the anticipated changes?
Right now, I think it's still too early to really know too much about that. But I do know that the method they're utilizing is a privilege to practice, which I think is going to provide more certainty for us than other potential methods like a multi-state license, because a multi-state license would essentially be you could issue a license to people in your state who want to practice in other states, but you would no longer be offering a license to people outside of your state. With the privilege to practice, if people want to practice in your state, they would apply to the commission for the privilege to practice in your state, and it would operate a little bit differently that way. But a lot of those details have not fully been worked out. But those are some of my questions, because I was looking to see, we operate as a state agency in Kansas based on the revenue we receive from license fees. And so if something were to change with that, it could impact our operations in a significant way if it, based on the nature of the professions. There's a fair number of individuals who live out of Kansas who are licensed in Kansas. And so changing that revenue stream would make a difference in our ability to balance our expenditures and different things like that.
And the commission starts to meet in November, is that correct? Is that their first meeting for the compact?
And I am not sure when that first meeting is.
And yeah, I'm going to do a little research about when they meet, how often they meet, when we can, how much we can stay on top of the direction that they're leaning with some of these important topics. So I'll start trying to get in touch with that. Can you say more about the anticipated process that Kansas is going to go through if it's assumed we're going to adopt the compact? Like, what needs to happen? What are the steps?
So in the past, at least as has been my experience, so the BSRB has not been the entity that would request legislation on a compact. I think it's been the preference of the board to be able to view potential legislation in light of how it would affect the BSRB and licensees, and then to consider, should they be supportive of this or express concerns if there are concerns with language for a compact. So if there was another entity that wanted to bring forward the compact, then I think the board would have a discussion about, would they be supportive of it? I think the role of the advisory committee, now that you have heard information on the compact, your authority is to provide recommendations to the board. And so if you felt comfortable with the compact or were supportive of it, you could provide a recommendation back to the board. Ultimately, it would be, the consideration of the board in terms of their position. But as an advisory committee that assists the work of the board, that could be something that you could do if you were supportive of the compact. And then if legislation came before the legislature, the board could direct me on behalf of the BSRB to go and speak to that committee and offer testimony either in favor of the bill or potentially voice any concerns the board might have with the bill.
Terrific. So no one has come forth yet to sponsor legislation to adopt the compact.
So legislation comes forward usually right at the very beginning of the year.
Okay.
There's model language out there because the compact model language is available to be reviewed, and it has been passed by different states. So that is out there. But usually pre-filed legislation does not come up until just the very end of the year or the very beginning of the following year.
Okay. So we have advisory committee meetings set up in the right places that we could make a decision about this if legislation was introduced.
It depends when the legislation was introduced, but there is another advisory committee meeting in December for the Professional Counseling Advisory Committee.
Okay, so we've got that, and then February. So it doesn't seem like should we make a recommendation now? Do we need to form an opinion now so that we're ready, or should we wait for more information?
And I think that's a good topic of conversation for the advisory committee. You've received some information, you've had the opportunity to do research, ask questions. If you are supportive of the compact and you feel comfortable making a recommendation, you could definitely do that now. Or you could wait and gather additional information. It really just kind of comes up, it's a matter of the advisory committee members' perspective on that one.
As I have shared with Andrew, I've kind of gone back and forth with the idea of the compact. But, to be real honest, where I think it needs to go is that we need to probably approve it and before for having it occur within the state. It just seems like the best. The last conversation I had with Andrew, however, it was the other way. But looking at all the different angles, I think that it's probably a good thing for Kansas. My opinion.
Thank you for that. It's an important opinion. Anyone else?
I would just say that. Oh, go ahead, Harriet.
If a person has the top tier licensure in another state, and is licensed in Kansas and licensed in another state, and has the top tier licensure in another state, but not in Kansas, has the LPC in Kansas, that might be some confusion there in terms of how this person would also then be licensed in Kansas with the top tier. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, which one controls is basically what you're saying.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, okay. David, do you know anything about that?
I believe most of the multi-state compacts have language about what is your home state. And even if you're licensed in several states, there's usually language that directs you to use one particular state as a home state. And so it would probably look to where your home state license was. I believe I would need to double check that with the language of the compact. And I know that some of the compacts allow you to change where your home state is. But usually that's where they go off first, is where's your home state. And a lot of times that is where you're physically located. But there may be a different definition for how you can define your home state.
Okay, thank you.
I do think it's important to distinguish between privilege and license, because they're two different things. And so a person's getting a privilege to practice in the state is not getting a license in our state. So there's different requirements to get the privilege versus getting the actual license. So I think it's important to distinguish between those two things as well. Now they're still able to practice in the state, but it is different than meeting our licensure requirements. The other thing I would say is that, just so it's clear, so that nobody thinks Bob and I were having meetings we shouldn't have been having, he and I actually served on a different board where this has come up. And so we were having conversation in that context and not having anything that would violate the any Open Records Act or anything like that under the advisory committee pieces. So I just, after the legal trainings the last couple of years, I'm making sure everybody knows that we're not doing things we're not supposed to be doing. I want to make that clear too.
Well, thank you.
And I have abstained within that organization of making any comments and any voting, so that I could in this one, if I chose to do so.
Thank you for that.
Sometimes we need especially since we need a quorum sometimes.
Right. That's half of the reason I'm quiet so much of the time. I'm a pretty chatty person about a lot of things, but I try to be so careful. So thank you for that. Thank you so much for your feedback about taking that into consideration when you're operating in other places and other roles. Any other questions about the compact or feedback? So it sounds like we could vote to, what would the vote be? Support the compact, or what would the language be if we were to vote on it today?
I think that could be, you could just consider a recommendation that if compact language is brought before the 2023 legislature, you could have a recommendation that the professional counselor or professional counseling advisory committee would be supportive of the board supporting the compact.
Well, thank you for writing that motion like real time. I'm so grateful. I've said many times how appreciative I am that we have an attorney as an executive director. I've watched him do that real time almost every time we're together. So would someone like to make a motion that says if legislative language is brought in front of the legislature for the Kansas Compact, the Counseling Advisory Committee is in favor of such legislation? Is that close, David?
Yeah, and they would encourage the board to support the compact.
Encouraging the board to support the compact. Thank you. Do I have a motion for that?
I support that motion. I motion.
What
And I
you
will,
said?
and I will second it.
Okay, terrific. All in favor, say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Okay, my goodness.
I have to abstain though, just to indicate that as well. So
Andrew Secor is abstaining.
Edith Torres too.
And Adil Torres. So David, does that mean we have enough to pass?
Yes, quorum is 4, and so you have 2 abstentions, and you still have 4 members that voted in favor of it. So there's no issue with that at all.
Okay. Well, a very subtle little conversation that's going to have big implications for the state of Kansas. My goodness. Whew. I don't know how long some of you have been watching this come to fruition, but it just came to fruition. So, wow, what a big step. Thank you. Wow. Whew. Okay. Any other discussion we need to have on that before we move on? Okay. Old business, part C. We have draft 4 of KCREP standards. And at this point, I assume our main goal is to just look at them and familiarize ourselves with them. Is there anything else, David, we need to do with that?
No, the advisory committee had discussed past drafts, and then last one we had was draft 3. And so draft 4 was released in September of 2022. So just wanted to make sure that the advisory committee was aware of it. And so nothing necessarily to bring up about that. Just wanted to make sure that individuals had seen it and they could review it if they would like to do so.
Thank you. And this, oh, Andrew? Yeah.
well, I didn't know what was being brought up in which of the parts of the agenda, whether it was here or back at a letter A under old business. But one of the things that Dave had mentioned was the language about who's chairing the program or who's considered the leader of the program, and that language requires a degree in counseling, which has been something that's affected a good number of folks. And we don't need to do anything with this today, but I just wanted to mention the possibility. I don't think there's been changes, at least that I can see, that are substantial. They still require the leader of the program to be designated and the definition of a core faculty member does have a person that has a degree in counseling, preferably from a KCREP program, but also it could be a related doctoral degree. Prior to 2013, only if they were enrolled, like they were teaching in a counselor ed program for a year at least prior to 2013. I think that was in the other standard too, maybe. So there is one option for people where if their chair or the leader, the designated leader of the program didn't have a doctoral degree in counseling, but such, let's say, had a degree in psychology, and that person was chairing or was the leader in that program, was employed full-time in a counselor ed program prior to July 1st, 2013, that they have listed here, that person technically would still qualify under KCREP's definition. It's just anybody after July 1 of 2013, it had to be a degree in counseling. So I don't know if we want to even get that sticky, or I just know that that's been something that we probably do want to talk about, is that's in line with KCREP to have that in there. But I do know that it is affecting certain folks being able to get licensed, which there's a whole other section, which is like they have to align with the profession of counseling, so like there's this whole thing that's not in our regulations. But the idea is that the people chairing the program, the people teaching the program that are core faculty align with the counseling profession, and that they're being taught by people that are trained in the counseling arena. So I know that that has been an issue for some folks, and I think that there have been conversations beyond our advisory committee about that issue. I don't know that I have a particular discussion about changing that yet or not, but I do know that a person not getting not having a chair that has a degree in counseling, just they're never able to get licensed in our state now. We don't even look at their education to see if the education meets, because that education, program requirement, the program requirement is not met. So we don't even look at the educational side. And so we may want to leave it as is, because it protects the profession and the license and the work people are getting. Or we may want to consider, do we want to add anything else? But I just want to mention that here, but we don't need to talk about that today, because I know there's other things that need to be discussed, but that's just something for a future meeting.
So Andrew, are you also talking about people who have a PhD in counseling psychology? Because they don't have a PhD in counseling, but it's in psychology that's focused on counseling, which is confusing to me.
It's interesting because counseling's in the title.
Yeah.
They say a degree in counselor education, which is different than counseling psychology.
Mm-hmm.
So counseling psychology would meet, I think, the definition of a related degree prior to 2013, but that after 2013, only a degree in counselor education would be what would be constituted for the degree needed for a core faculty member. Because counseling psychology, while counseling is involved, a lot of the folks that teach counseling psychology programs are psychologists, which are aligned with APA and not ACA. And so there's a very different professional identity that's being developed in those students. And what I see in our state is confusion when they get out of their programs and then they get into counseling clinical supervision. There's a lot of relearning that they have to do to realign themselves with counseling versus psychology.
Mm-hmm.
Because they are different professions,
Right.
essentially.
In our discussion at the last advisory committee meeting, that the message I remember was we should keep it the same. We don't want to dilute our field or, weaken the standards of our field. Do we need to revisit this at our next meeting and more in-depth discussion?
Sorry, I didn't recall that. Maybe I had stepped out or something. So if we've already cleared that up, then I apologize for wasting time here. So
you're not wasting time at all. I think it's so important for us to make sure that we're all on the same page, and you're really bringing up important topics. So do we want to continue to discuss it at the next meeting? I would prefer that, just because let's revisit it and just clarify how we really feel about it. Is that okay? David, would you put that on our agenda for the next meeting?
We can, but I just want to remind that we've been talking about this for the last 30 years. Okay.
This is not new.
No, it's not new. My degree is counseling and psychology, and I got my degree because there was no counselor educator. There were finally 5 counselor educator programs in my, but when you look at my curriculum, it's all counselor education. When you look at my identity, has been counselor education since the get-go.
Right.
But yeah, my degree is counseling and psych.
Right.
which is where that 2013 provision is helpful, because a person such as Adil, who had been training or teaching in counselor ed programs prior to that expectation, is still eligible to teach in those programs. And technically, if Adil was, let's say, looking at Wichita State's program and he was the designated leader, because of his history, a student that was in that program could still qualify, and Adil could still qualify to teach, which I think we need to recognize too, as we're looking at reviewing people's applications. Is ours just says it has to be a degree in counseling, but would we want to make a provision where a person that was in a program where someone such as Adil, who met the requirements that K-Prep established, could still be considered as meeting program requirement, that would warrant then look into their educational background to see if it would be able to do a full consideration of the person versus just saying it was done right there without taking any additional look at who was the person, when did they get their degree, were they a counselor, educator, in a counselor ed program prior to 2013. Those are extra steps for us, but it may mean that somebody doesn't get left out that would otherwise qualify.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. That is an appropriate way potentially to expand. Yeah.
But that depends on how sticky and messy that makes things too. But Ideal is right. I mean, he's a competent, qualified counselor educator by KCREP's definition, by experience of where he was at before 2013.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I was in graduate school a long time ago, and all of my professors were licensed psychologists, but they all taught in a counselor education program.
Mm-hmm. I remember a professional shift when I finished grad school. All of my professors were counseling psychologists at the Department of Ed. And I remember there being a shift, which is something Andrew was speaking to.
It's really been the last 15 years since I've been in the field. I've seen a big change toward really being more specific with the profession of counseling to protect and insulate its identity in much the same way other professions had done, which is where I think a number of these expectations have come from. Is how do we ensure we have, like, professional counseling is its own identity, has it's really developed that identity within the field. And that's really been, I think, in my career, I've seen it's been more rapid, it seems like, than maybe it had been prior to that.
The shift to protect that identity?
Yeah, but also pushback. Because APA started to push out cancer educators or people who identify as cancer educators, and then let teach in APA accredited program. The old days used to be okay to go either way, but then APA started. So then KCREP came back and started to push back. Actually, it wasn't KCREP, was that was cancer education group. When you look at all the old people, they're all cancer and psychologists. But I think that was a pushback. Racially saw, because I think that the idea that you can teach, I can teach in your program, but you can teach in mine. There was a pushback. But anyhow, we've been having this conversation for a long time. I love to teach intro to counseling because I love to talk about the history.
Mm-hmm.
I taught in 2 programs that were within the psychology and counseling department. And there was some consternation developing between those 2 arenas among faculty within the department. And so there was some problems that ensued, and, prioritizing one over the other became an issue in both of those different universities.
So are there ways that we can change what we require so that this conversation has a finite, not to put an end to it, but just has a purpose in how we can regulate things in our state? Are there things we can do?
You would need to amend the current regulation.
Okay.
Because the current regulation says a degree in counseling, it doesn't give an alternative. So
Okay.
a person could not meet our regulation, but meet KCREP standards.
Okay. So then is the question, are our standards too stringent, or is KCREP too, I don't know, flexible, right? And what's best for our state, which is how I'm always, of course, going to think about it. So this feels like a conversation that we need to have, that we need to continue with, so that we can really figure out the right thing to do. Are you all in agreement that we can continue this at our next advisory committee meeting?
That's fine. I think it just comes up for me because I look at some of these things and I know that it happens. I see the applications and so forth. And so I don't know, the BSRB is talking about it because of that fact as well, not just what I do, but just the review process. So I think if we can come to a decision to say we're going to keep it as it is, which is fine, or we want to, I don't know that we can open it up and make more flexible, because that might make it really confusing we have to add more questions to our review form.
Right.
Have you were a counselor educator prior to 13 and a counselor education program and the related degree? And we can ask those questions if we want to, but I think we need to make a decision if we're going to, because I think the board is talking about that, which is why I think we just need to decide, yes, that's what we're going to do, and then just be good with that.
Yeah. I'm making notes. And that being said, can we agree to discuss this and make a decision at our next board meeting or our advisory committee meeting? Let's do that. So David, you got that?
I got it down.
Thank you, sir. Okay, thank you for the discussion. Okay, let's go back here. K-CREP draft 4, you have draft 4. Draft 4 should be the last draft. They said they weren't going to release any more. Is that correct, David? I think
that was the intent.
so. This might be it.
Yeah. I
Okay.
think they were hoping to have it finalized by the end of this year. And then I think they were looking at implementing the changes in 2024, I believe, at least for the newly accredited programs. If I understand right, the ones that are already accredited will be evaluated under the new standards when they come up for renewal or reaccreditation. So.
Got it. Okay, great. Good. So that hopefully that's it. But if draft 5 happens, I'm sure you'll send it our way. Okay, new business. Okay, new advisory committee members. So I'm glad we're getting to this. You guys have had the applicants for a long time. Tom Wolf dropped off. So we have one less person that dropped off. And David, we're trying to find 3. Is that correct?
So there are currently 7 members of the advisory committee. There is an advisory committee policy for the board, which outlines who can serve as members of the advisory committee. So there is the board member who is appointed by the governor for that profession. And then there's a public member who serves on the advisory committee. The advisory committee policy states that of the non-board members serving on advisory committees, you can have as few as a minimum of 3 and a maximum of 10. So currently right now you have 5, which means you could add as many as 5, but the advisory committee policy also states that there should be some staggering of terms so that not all members come up at the same time. Just as a reminder, terms are 2 years long. You can be reappointed for up to 4 terms, and that's at the discretion of the chair of the board. The chair of the board has the authority to appoint members to the advisory committee or also remove members. But your authority here is to submit recommendations on new members to be added to the advisory committee. And then that would be reviewed by the chair of the board, and then those would be officially appointed at a board meeting. And the chair does have some authority to collect additional information after receiving the recommendations. So, and just kind of to cover this before we get started, the advisory committee policy also states that in reviewing the nominations, the committee should work to ensure that there is diverse representation, including but not limited to geographic setting, gender, culture, and ethnicity. And members should provide representation of the levels of licensing for that discipline. And those members should be selected from among the public and private practitioners and educators. And as a way of defining the process, the conversation as far as who to recommend for the advisory committee, that has to happen in an open meeting during a committee of the whole discussion. So there's no secret ballots or anything like that. You've all received a copy of the resumes and letters of interest from the individuals who had requested to be considered for appointment to the advisory committee. And so there's not a specific way that you have to determine which recommendations or how you recommend individuals aside from what's already stated, which gives you some guidance in terms of what to look for. But once you reach recommendations, then I will summarize those in a document to provide it to the chair of the board. And then after the members are appointed, then I'll follow up with those members to give them some additional information. And that's kind of how that works. And let's see, the only other comment that I would make for you is that in looking at how the advisory committees have selected members in the past, the rare method is that they go person by person and kind of just discuss all the different applicants. What's more common, and I think maybe a more preferred method, would be to have members of the advisory committee discuss which individuals stood out to you the most, and then to see if there is consensus based on who stood out to you the most. And then in terms of whether you could select 3 members or more, you are above your minimum and you're below your maximum. So you could appoint or recommend as many as 5 individuals, or you could do a number less than that. So I think at the last meeting, there was discussions about either 3 or 4, but based on staggering, I think 3 is a good number. If you do find 4 candidates, you're definitely able to recommend 4 as well if you want to.
Thank you. And Bob, you mentioned geographical considerations at our last meeting. Do you remember what you said? Wasn't there one, we wanted a southwest one and then a northwest? Do you remember? Oh, you're on mute. You're on mute, I think.
Sorry about that.
Sorry.
The Kansas Counseling Association splits the state into 6 different regions and has historically. So I was just trying to think in those terms, you know, in terms of counseling statewide. There's really the north central area is kind of we had Ken Huey, and he rolled off of here. Someone from the kind of north central area, maybe some from either the southwest or northwest areas.
Mhm.
Those are the main ones that we need if we're talking about geographical representation.
Got it.
Would be the areas to focus on.
And I thought I would run through real quickly. I went ahead and pulled the cities for their current members of the advisory committee. So that might be helpful to kind of have as you consider other individuals to add. And so Laura Shaughnessy is from Roland Park. Jim Kilmartin, I have down as Shawnee. Harriet Bachner, Pittsburgh. Michelle Fairbank, Hayes. Bob Kircher, Lawrence. Andrew Secor, Spring Hill. And Adil Torres Rivera, I have you down as Wichita.
Yep. Okay, so we're saturated in Johnson County, that's for sure.
And Northeast Kansas, just in general. Yeah.
Right. There you go. Okay, anybody who wants to start? Anybody really stand out, really feel passionate about someone?
There are a couple that stood out for me. Michael Countryman.
Mhm.
I think he was, I don't know where he's from, but stood out. Rachel Himken. Melissa Briggs. Those are ones that stood out to me. And I think his last name is Goris.
Oh,
That is, those are the ones that kind of stood out to me as being up there, very qualified. Any of those very qualified, I think. But those are the ones that stood out to me.
Thank you. I had Countryman and Asha Goris on my list as well.
And I will say I had Countryman too. I mean, he's out with South Central Mental Health, I think, the executive director down there.
Mhm.
And Dr. Goris is actually no longer with Mid-America. He actually left and is out at Fort Riley. So he's living out there now, working at the military base, working with soldiers and families and such at Fort Riley. So since we're talking about location, I just wanted to that's where he's working now. I mean, I know his wife is still here. She's going to be moving that direction as well, but just mainly for location purposes, we're thinking saturation in one area. He's actually not in this area as of the end of the summer. So.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I echo Andrew's choices because I think that kind of complements some pieces, Goris and Countryman.
Mhm.
I was thinking Vanessa Perez, she's in Wichita. And Melissa Briggs, I believe, is in Wichita as well. And I was also thinking,
I think she's in Manhattan or Topeka.
oh, I thought she was at Wichita State University. No, she went to school there, excuse me. And Goris, Acha Goris as well, and a couple other people mentioned.
Mhm. What about Southwest or Northwest Kansas? I mean, how far west can we go with any of our applicants?
We've got Great Bend. One of our persons was from Great Bend, I saw.
Mhm.
I don't see Melissa Briggs on the list of things. I can't find her, but
She was
There's a
sent
lake.
separately.
Yeah.
oh, okay. Yeah, we've got, who was it that was out west? I'm trying to see.
Where that went.
We got, that's Larned. So that's Lindsay Dinkle was Larned.
Oh,
Hempkin was
Rachel
Great.
Hempkin.
Yeah, Rachel Hempkin was Great Bend, Kansas.
Yeah.
From a personal perspective, and I guess as a public member that's appointed based upon where he lives, I would encourage this committee to pick the best possible people that represent what you do. If you do not have to subscribe to regional interests, then I think your profession is served best by picking the people that you think will contribute best, have experience in your professional opinion, and will add value to this committee. So
I agree.
Yeah, thank you for that.
I agree as well, but I think also maintaining our responsibility to consider those factors. But if at the end of the day, the best folks that we can have on the committee are not in those areas. But at the same time, I think it's good for us to consider those factors too. So thank you, Jim. I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone else? So it sounds like Michael Countryman and Acha Goes, I knew I was going to say his name wrong, are two people that we have general consensus about. That's safe to say.
I think that we can also make a case for Gomez based on ethnicity.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, I'm kind of echo what Jim said, but at the same token, you can have the best people all living in the same place, and they're only going to look at the interests of that particular place.
Mm-hmm.
You maybe have an outliner who happen to live somewhere else, and based on their experience, they can bring something more to the committee. So I think that that's an interesting balance to keep, then sometimes just having just the best out of just Wichita do not represent Kansas as a state.
Right.
So who did you say again, Laura? Who were the two that you mentioned?
Michael Countryman, Anacha Goris.
So did you guys find Melissa Briggs? That, again, because that one was sent separately.
Right, that one was sent on July 18th.
Mhm.
There were the initial applicants that came in, and then after those were sent out, we received the application from Melissa Briggs. So I went ahead and sent that separately.
Here it is.
Mhm.
Any questions about her? Does anybody feel strongly one way or another about Melissa, her application?
Well, I know her personally, so I guess I would be biased. I mean, I do support her.
Good to know. Where does
And full disclosure, I know her as well. I worked with her at one time.
Okay.
She was a student of mine several years ago.
Where does she live and or work?
I guess you said that she's in Manhattan?
She lives in Topeka, works at K-State. She was a graduate of Pittsburgh State.
Mhm.
And K-State, doctorate at K-State.
She certainly has some interesting experience. I mean, looking at the fact that, I mean, she's been senior vice president, clinical assessment services at TFI. I guess she is. I mean, she has been an executive director since 2021. It maybe looks like there. Got some teaching background and clinical background. I mean, those things there, I mean, could offer a perspective. I mean, she's licensed in several states. I mean, she certainly has some strengths there regarding her awareness of needs, I would say, in the profession, experience from different vantage points.
Yeah.
But
Lots of leadership. Yeah.
I had mentioned Vanessa Perez. She's in Wichita.
Mhm. Yeah, I really liked her credentials as well.
Are you talking about Vanessa or?
Uh-huh. Yeah. So far, we've named 4 strong candidates. Michael Countryman, Vanessa Perez, Asha Gores, Melissa Briggs. And we can add 4 if we choose.
Yeah, I mean, if we had to go for 3, I would leaning toward Vanessa Perez just based on race and ethnicity.
Okay.
You know, that's my bias because I think they bring something else different to the board.
Mhm.
Okay, so, but I like 4.
Do we want to do 4?
I would support going for 4 at this point. I think it's unfair for this committee to try to rule a person out purely on a number. So if you find 4 people that are strong, I encourage you to act on that.
Thank you for that. Anyone disagree with that?
can I ask Dave, when is my time on this committee done? I know that I'm the senior member at this point of the advisory committee because all the folks I started with are gone. So everybody else with me now is new. So I know my time is running out here. So
Sure. I should be able to have that in about 20 seconds.
okay.
Okay. So
Actually, Andrew, I think I came on just right after you did. I think it's 4 years ago or.
Well,
5?
I was on 4 years before. This is my second term.
Oh my gosh.
Oh.
So yeah, so my 8 years is coming to a conclusion here somewhere.
okay. Yeah, what I had down here is that Bob, you and Andrew's first term, I believe, ended in June of 2019. So you would be up, your terms would both be up at June of 2023. And the way that we've kind of done it is, that would be for your third term. So you could have 1 additional term after that. Based on what I have down here, it would be through, you could request to be reappointed, and then that could go until June of 2025.
So without any new change Bob, I didn't know you and I had been on this that long. I thought I was on before you with Todd when he asked me to come on, but that was pretty quick. So 2023, June of next year, we would be done unless we requested reappointment.
Right, you each would be, you're in your third term right now, and you could request to be reappointed for one additional term, which would be 2 years.
They're 2-year terms, right? Yep.
Right, yeah.
That now it's clicking
Yeah,
because
and if somebody joined midterm, we would just include that from when that term started and go from there. So
gotcha. So we have our third term and then fourth. I was thinking in terms of Laura because they serve they have 4-year terms, right? At the chair level. Yeah. So we have okay. So we've still got a little bit of time left if we wanted to. I just wanted to make sure, like when we're thinking about overlapping terms, like when our terms like end and such, and so I'm totally fine with if we have 4 good folks and we want to add all 4 and that works for everything, then I don't have a problem with it.
Okay. Thank you for that.
and it is always possible that a member of an advisory committee could step down midterm for one reason or another. And so that would open up additional spots in the future, but yeah.
So it sounds like we're going with 4. And do I understand that we have chosen our 4? Would you like me to say their names again, or do we all know who they are?
Yeah, say them again.
Okay. Michael Countryman, Vanessa Perez, Acha Goris, and Melissa Briggs. Does anybody have a change they want to make to that list? Do I need a motion to adopt these 4 people?
You could do a motion. I mean, it appears to be by consensus, which would be fine too.
Okay. Okay.
So it's up to you.
Well, we'll just do consensus. This is always easy. I can't believe how easy this process is. I always think it's going to take hours. It never does. So thank you so much for, putting your choices out there. And I like that we have a kind of an organic way that we decided on 4 people out of 19 or 18. So out of consensus, we have 4 new advisory committee members. And so will they be available? Will we invite them to the December meeting?
So technically the authority of the advisory committee is to make recommendations.
All right.
So,
Okay.
so I'll have to summarize this in a letter that'll go to the chair of the board,
Okay.
and then she'll review this as a recommendation, and then the chair of the board has authority to appoint members to the advisory committee. And the chair of the board can request additional information on anyone who's been nominated as she evaluates candidates. But once she appoints members to the advisory committee, after that point, they will officially be on the advisory committee, and then they can take part in any meetings after that.
Awesome. Well, 2 months is certainly enough time for that to happen. So we can anticipate seeing them in December, I think. Is there anything I need to do to help that process along?
Nope, I'll go ahead and draft a letter just summarizing the actions that took place today and the recommendation, and I will send you a copy of that for you to review. And as long as you agree that looks acceptable, then I will go ahead and send that to the chair, and then she can follow up either directly with you or with me with questions, or just go ahead and take that to the board at the next board meeting.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Okay, we move along. Let's see. Okay, next new business item, update for the unprofessional conduct review committee.
Yeah, and I'll just go ahead and take care of this one just briefly. So that subcommittee that was authorized by the board did meet twice and went through all of the unprofessional conduct regulations for the profession and had some additional language on some other potential regulatory changes in the realm of unprofessional conduct. We are getting close to time today, but between now and the next meeting, if you could review the minutes from the meeting that took place in July and also the one that took place just last Friday, September 30th. Go ahead and review those. We're ready to comment at the next advisory committee meeting in December. And then if you can plan to sort of finalize maybe some of those recommendations, then those could be forwarded to the board. And then to start off next year, the board can consider recommendations for your unprofessional conduct regulations when next year begins.
Terrific. Okay, finally some homework. So we will do that and get back to you in December. Thank you. Okay, care of clients in crisis. I think this is a very important thing that we're looking at, and this is a board level. The BSRB recommended that all disciplines look at this. Is that correct, David?
That's right. Yep.
Go ahead, if you would please, and take that.
Sure. So recently, the National Suicide Prevention Hotline 988 rolled out, and there were some discussions at a recent board meeting in terms of what responsibility providers have concerning patients who are in crisis that might contact a provider after hours. And so you have a certain responsibility to have something in place that if someone contacts you and they're in crisis after hours, they know who they should speak to, or that there is someone available for them to speak to. There was a question at the board meeting about whether 988 would satisfy for that if you could leave a message and say, we're unavailable, but if you're in crisis, please contact 988, if that would be sufficient. And at least there were some comments from some board members that that might not be sufficient in terms of your responsibility as a practitioner. And so they discussed some potential language, maybe clarifying whether practitioners needed to have a more formal relationship or more formal arrangement worked out with someone that they could refer their clients to after hours if they were unavailable, or if potentially the current rules of unprofessional conduct could be modified to provide more clarity or guidance in concerning this topic, in terms of topics like client responsibility or potentially client abandonment or continuity of care type responsibilities. And so we don't have any official language for you to review on this. So I guess this would be another potential homework topic. If you have thoughts on it today, it could definitely be discussed at the meeting today. But that is what had been communicated during the last board meeting. And I had asked each of the advisory committees to discuss this topic to see if you are in agreement in terms of what would the professional's responsibility be in that situation. And then us as the licensing body and the individuals who oversee the unprofessional conduct regulations for the profession, what language would be suitable to be put in addressing this, or whether the current language is satisfactory. So I'll go ahead and stop there, but those were the comments the board had talked about.
Thank you, David. So any initial comments to begin this conversation that I assume we will add to at our next meeting?
I'm always going to have something to say, but I'll keep it short. I do think it's important. I am concerned about what we come up with, because developing formal relationships like that can be difficult, I think, in the private practice world. I do think that saying 988 or 911 or emergency room is too simple of a solution. I think that's contributes to a lot of overload within hospital settings, especially when we just say go here. I try to refer people back to like RSI in our area, which is 24/7, 365 staffing for crisis stuff for Douglas, Wyandotte, and Johnson County. And so I include that. And also I look at the actual crisis number for Johnson County mental health. So I try to provide more direction through my voicemail as well as my informed consent. But I think that's the thing is a lot of providers say I don't provide 24-hour crisis services. And so here are your options after hours. But the idea of what's crisis, right? Like, because what one client thinks is a crisis is not actually a crisis. So there's that whole thing. And then there's what do we mean by establishing formal relationships and such? You're going to have overload of places where certain folks are going to be trying to partner and what that even means. So I think that we need to consider our responsibility to folks who are in situations where they're certainly considering, suicide, self-injurious type behaviors and such, and what are those folks should have safety plans to begin with. In those cases, like we would have already planned that out and it would already be known what's being done and who to contact and who the other providers are. So I don't know how much we do with this and what others are talking about, but I think just simply saying like, saying call 911 gets me out of my responsibility. I think we can do better than that, for sure.
For sure. Thank you for that. Anyone else want to comment today? And okay, let's be sure and bring this up at our next meeting with discussion. Let's figure out a way to make this more personal for the professionals that are out there. Yeah, just saying to call 911 or 988, then what are they going to do with it? I mean, they're going to have to figure out how to get a person to a place of care. And so, yeah. All right, let's go ahead and bring that to our next meeting. Okay, the last thing, discussion on the Kansas Fight Addictions Grant appointee. So David, do you want to talk about that?
Sure. So the 2021 legislature passed a bill that is now in statute. The statute is KSA 75-778. And that is the Kansas Fights Addiction Grant Act. And as part of that act, they have established a Kansas Fights Addiction Grant Review Board. And essentially what the Grant Review Board is the proceeds from federal lawsuits that involve opioids, the portion of that would be collected by Kansas from those federal lawsuits, 75% would go into a fund, and then 25% would be provided to local units of government for assistance with addiction services. But for the 75% that would be provided into a fund, and it would be overseen by 11 individuals who would be appointed that have expertise in prevention, reduction, treatment, or mitigation of the effects of substance abuse and addiction. And the BSRB is named as one of the groups that is able to appoint a member to this board. And when the legislature initially passed that bill after the 2021 session, they went ahead and named me to sit in that role temporarily. And the board did not meet last year, but they have met twice so far this year. And while I have some expertise in the realm of prevention and reduction through the work that I do with the licensing board here to make sure that we have enough addiction counselors that are licensed and make sure that we're overseeing the profession with that responsibility. The board talked about really wanting to make sure that we have someone who has expertise with the treatment or mitigation of the effects of substance abuse, and to have someone who might have more strong expertise in the area, including significant knowledge on substance use and addictions or treating addiction and experience with that. And so what they did is the board at the last meeting said they wanted to identify another appointee for the Kansas Fights Addiction Grant Review Board. And they wanted to name someone who currently serves on one of the advisory committees. So they are looking at an individual currently serving on the advisory committee who is interested in serving as the board's appointee on this grant review board. And I mentioned the funding would be collected into that fund, and then the 11 individuals that serve on that board would oversee a grant process where individual or companies and I believe it is nonprofits and other entities could apply for some of that funding. State agencies, local governments, and non-for-profits operating within the state may apply to the board for funding to address substance abuse and help ensure addiction services are provided throughout the state. And they think there's going to be about $195 million over the course of 18 years to be distributed in terms of grants. And so they're looking for someone who has knowledge and will be able to serve on this board. There's really not terms of service on this board, but they would like to have someone who would be able to serve for some time to ensure continuity of operations. Currently, the board is meeting here in Topeka about once a month, but the current meetings so far have been every other month, and the meetings have been lasting about 3 to 4 hours. They have been taking place at Washburn University's campus in the KBI building there on campus, but they've had some discussions about maybe allowing a remote option, given that some attendees may not be physically located in Topeka. But the work of that grant review board is going to be some really important work. It's a sizable amount of money that would be overseen for a very good purpose. And so I did send out an email to the members of the advisory committee earlier this week, or I guess Thursday of last week. So go ahead and review that. If you are interested in serving as the board's appointee, go ahead and send me a copy of a letter of interest and an updated resume. And make sure to do that by 5 p.m. on October 14th. And again, the statute, if you wanted to look through a little bit more and get some background on what was passed in that bill, it is KSA 75-778. And there's some other statutes right around there that would be also included in that act. But and as I mentioned, this is limited to current members of the advisory committee. So I know we're broadcasting this meeting, but the applicants are limited to the current members of the advisory committee. So this is really for you on this Zoom call. So if you think you might have expertise in these areas and you might be interested in serving, feel free to apply through the appropriate way there.
Great, thank you so much. And so all the disciplines of the BSRB have been notified, and everybody on the committee, on the advisory committees, are being asked to apply?
If they would like to serve and they believe that they have the expertise to serve, then yeah, any member of any of the advisory committees is open to apply for this.
Okay, great. Thank you for clarification on that. Okay, so if you have an interest, you know what to do. Okay, that really concludes everything that we needed to do, which was a lot. I'm kind of amazed at how much was accomplished today. Our next meeting will be on December 5th. Thank you so much for all of your time, efforts. We really did accomplish some important things today, and your voices are so important. So thank you so much for taking the time. I need a motion to adjourn. Mr. Kilmartin makes a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second? Andrew Secor, second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. No nays. Okay, thank you so much, everyone. Take care, and we'll see you in 2 months.
All right.
Take
Thank
care.
you, everybody.
Thank you.